Well, we're here everyone. Was the excited exclamation that a certain squinty-eyed, perverted teen made as he gestured to the small village sprawling out before him all across a wide open desert plain. The tiny little community itself appeared as though it were choked off and suffocated from the rest of the outside world by the sheer amounts of dirt and, well, dirt, that stretched out on all sides of it and blew through the town like an unending light mist of hazy brown dust. Man, it sure is a lot smaller than I imagined, the spiky-haired former gym leader observed as he put his hands over his eyes and stared down at the somewhat small village that resided a short distance away from the large cliff he was standing atop. Trekking up the cliffside with a few light pants, an orange-haired girl in jean shorts and a yellow cut-off top stopped beside of the older boy and then sunk unceremoniously to the ground beneath her feet as she stared down at the town and snorted in a very unladylike fashion. Yeah, well, can you blame them? This place is surrounded by nothing but dirt and more freaking dirt. Rubbing her sore feet through her shoes, the redhead of sorts threw her head back and complained, why would anyone stick a town out in the middle of someplace like this anyway? A chuckling sound was suddenly heard from behind her and the seated girl looked back to see a black-haired boy in a tracksuit with a Pikachu on his shoulder and two other girls by his side walking towards them. Why don't you go down and tell em all that, Misty? Maybe they'll decide to move their town on your recommendation. The brunette by his right side giggled while the red-haired older one to his left just cracked an amused smile at the young man's good-natured jesting. I mean, after all, Misty's word is law in these lands. The clearly unamused girl gave a slight glare to him as they approached. Oh ha ha. You're just all happy because you get another chance to win a badge here, funny guy. Ash shrugged and then stepped up to stand beside of Brock while he looked out over the dusty, desolate town below. Yeah, you're probably right, Misty. I do love my gym badges. Soledad came up next to Ash and put her hands on her hips as she scanned the town for a few moments herself. Eventually, she pointed to a somewhat larger building amongst the houses and other structures in the village that stood out very clearly as a potential Pokémon gym. You see that? It might be the gym you're looking for, Ash, she observed idly. The young man put his hands into the pockets on the front of his tracksuit and nodded as Giselle came up to his other side. This place looks so cut off and isolated from everywhere else we've been to. Almost like Shadow's Hollow. Just not as dreary maybe, Misty surmised evenly. But yeah, I could see this place being like a more pleasant version of Shadow's Hollow. Well, we aren't gonna find out anything about it by just standing here, Ash stated as he looked away from the town. Let's head down there and see what it's like. With that said, the group of 5 left the cliffside and started heading down into the town itself. When they actually arrived, however, they found that the appearance of Triangle Village, named for the odd way in which the whole town was shaped into a triangle, was far removed from how the people actually acted. To Ash and his friends' utter joy, instead of the townspeople acting rude and unwelcoming towards them like the ones at Shadow's Hollow did, everyone they passed either waved, nodded or just smiled and greeted them like they were old friends. What was more, even though the town appeared at first glance like it would be poor and ill-maintained given the location, it really wasn't. The buildings and houses all looked well made and taken care of, the people didn't appear ratty and suffering, and the fact that everyone was practically swimming in dirt didn't seem to bother them whatsoever. One thing was for definite sure though, after a week of traveling to get where they were now, dealing with people who weren't rude, angry recluses was a gigantic plus and helped them to feel much more at ease and comfortable in the small town. Eventually coming to stand before the biggest building in the village, which was easily recognizable as the gym given the Pokémon League symbol above the door, Ash and his friends stepped inside and found themselves standing in a large, single room. The ceiling was incredibly high, with it being made up of large panes of glass instead of solid sheets. The floor was concrete with several large steel pillars placed at different areas to keep the big building standing, and the battlefield itself was made entirely of, unsurprisingly, dirt. All in all though, the entire gym appeared to be fairly well maintained. As the new arrivals checked out the gym, a door near the back of the room opened and out came a big black-haired man wearing a red country-style button-up shirt, faded blue jeans and brown work boots on his feet. He had a defined, angular face that was rough with stubble and black-colored eyes which seemed serious but not unfriendly. Seeing his visitors, the man walked out into the gym and greeted in a deep, friendly voice, "Well, it looks like we got visitors. How you kids doing? Anybody here for a gym battle?" Ash stepped forward. "I am, sir. My name is Ash and these are my friends." He gestured at Brock and the others and then up at Pikachu. "And this is my pal Pikachu." Still smiling, the man nodded. "Good to meet you all, my name's Andy." He then held his hands out and gestured at the gym around them, which was brightly illuminated thanks to the open glass ceiling above. "And welcome to my gym." Brock looked around a little more and smiled before crossing his arms and looking back at the now named Andy. "This is a real nice place you got here, Andy, well built and obviously maintained. Do you own it?" The older man shook his head as he walked up to Ash and the others. "Nah, I just lent it from the Pokémon League. Have now for about 7 years. Clapping his hands together, he then asked anxiously. "So, where are you from, Ash?" "Pallet Town," the boy answered without waiting. "We're on our way to Celadon City and decided to stop here along the way and challenge your gym." "Ah, you did, Andy observed with a grin. "Well, you came the right way, alright. What say you to a standard 3-on-3 match against my ground-type Pokémon?" "This is a ground-type gym?" Giselle asked curiously. "We didn't know that." Andy looked to her. "Sure is, little lady. Me and my Pokémon run the best ground-type gym in all of Kanto." Ash stepped forward then and smiled with a fire for battle in his eyes. "You're on, Andy, let's do it." The black-haired man grinned widely and clapped his hands again. "Alright. Lemme just phone in my ref from town and we can get this show on the road." Indeed, after a quick call to his gym's designated referee, the man in question appeared at the gym relatively quickly, dressed in the standard referee attire for league officials, and then prepared to judge Ash and Andy's battle. As the two opposing trainers met on either side of the large dirt-filled arena, Ash's friends and Soledad stood on the sidelines as eager spectators to the battle that lay ahead. None of them having yet seen a battle against an all-ground type gym leader and eager to do so now. "All right, kid," Andy announced from across the ring. "I'll let you choose first." Ash just thought for a few moments on the best choice he could pick for the upcoming battle and decided to use a Pokémon that he hadn't battled with yet in any official match. Smiling as he pulled the Pokéball out, Ash looked at the ball and nodded before throwing it into the air. "Let's go, Weepinbell." As Ash's second-owned grass-type Pokémon appeared on the sandy battlefield looking ready to fight his first battle and prove his strength with a loud call of, "Weepinbell." Andy just grinned and thumbed his nose. "A Weepinbell, huh? Well, let's see how it can handle this." The black-haired gym leader then tossed his own selected Pokéball onto the field with a shout of, "Diglett, let's show these kids how to churn up some earth." After the tiny mole-like Pokémon appeared from the ball and took form with its body partially submerged in the dirt, as per usual for both its regular and evolved species, Diglett gave a small chirp of its name. All while Weepinbell narrowed his eyes at his opponent and prepared himself for what could very well end up being an intense battle. On the sidelines, Ash's friends were expressing their own concerns over the upcoming match. "Do you really think Weepinbell stands a chance against a gym leader's Pokémon after never having battled before?" Giselle questioned with worry for Ash's grass type. "I don't see why not," Brock answered. "Weepinbell trains hard just like all of Ash's other Pokémon, so I don't foresee it being an impossibility for him to win. If Weepinbell stays focused and he and Ash work together as a team, then I see no reason why they can't beat Diglett." Soledad crossed her arms. "It will be hard since Diglett is inherently a tough Pokémon to battle given its nature for being underground so much. But I believe they can do it." "Yeah, have faith, Giselle," Misty reassured the older girl with a smile. "They've got this." The brunette just nodded and looked back to the battlefield while hoping to Arceus that her friends were right and Weepinbell wouldn't choke under the pressure of his first ever battle. For Ash himself, he was personally feeling quite glad in that moment that he had swapped all his Pokémon out, save for Pikachu obviously, days before in order to assemble his new lineup. Especially for the gym battles ahead that he had planned to take. Currently he had a team which consisted of, besides Pikachu, one of his Gyarados that used to follow James's old one, Fearow, Paris, Weepinbell and Primeape. A good, powerfully solid and well-rounded team of type-varying Pokémon that he was very anxious to use in 3 of the gym matches that he had fast approaching. Weepinbell had that honor first now, and Ash possessed nothing but full confidence in the grass type that he would do just fine in the battle that was about to commence. Rather he won or lost. When the referee finished explaining the usual set of rules and then waved his hands down on both sides for the battle to begin, Ash decided not to let Weepinbell wait another minute for a taste of what it was like to battle as he pointed and called out loudly, "Weepinbell, use Razor Leaf." Weep. The grass type called out as several razor-sharp leaves hurled from his leafy appendages and headed straight for Diglett. However, true to its nature, the ground type simply shot below the dirt as the leaves passed harmlessly overhead. Smirking, Andy shouted a command to his now underground Pokémon, "Diglett, use Dig." A chorus of, "Diglett dig. Diglett dig. Diglett dig," could be heard coming from under the ground as the tiny Pokémon burrowed at speeds too fast to follow underneath of the dirt-based battlefield. Weepinbell looked around at the ground below him, anxiously awaiting whatever sign there might be that the invisible Pokémon was going to suddenly spring up out of the ground and attack him. "Weepinbell, you need to stay alert," Ash shouted. Diglett could come up from anywhere at any time. No sooner did those words leave his lips and the ground under Weepinbell exploded, the grass type getting launched into the air with a pained grunt as he soared skyward from a brutal surprise headbutt courtesy of Diglett, whom had suddenly appeared out of nowhere underground. "Now Diglett, use Mud Shot," Andy commanded as his Pokémon started firing multiple sandy brown blotches of condensed mud at the flying Weepinbell. However, Ash knew the danger his Pokémon was in and countered quickly, "Weepinbell, use Vine Whip on the ceiling beams and pull yourself away." Coming back to his senses, the grass type shot out 2 vines at the steel beams above him and used it to wrap his vines around them and then pull himself up and out of the way of the mud balls. "Now use Razor Leaf again," Ash yelled as Weepinbell hurled dozens of sharp leaves down at Diglett. Unfortunately, Diglett fell back on its old failsafe strategy and disappeared back below the earth again, allowing Weepinbell's attack to once more pass harmlessly over the dirt. This became a trend that both Pokémon kept going for quite some time during the battle. Weepinbell would send dozens of leaves at Diglett time and time again, which the ground type would easily avoid by ducking under the earth. In retrospect, Diglett would appear randomly from different points in the arena and then use either Mud Shot or Mud Bomb to try and attack Weepinbell up near the ceiling, whom was still swinging in different directions on the rafters by his vines to stay out of Diglett's range. Ash knew that something had to bend or else the battle was going to drag on forever, and due to that, his brilliant strategic mind went into overdrive on just what he could have Weepinbell do to defeat the elusive Diglett. Finally, during one of the moments in which Andy was having Diglett use a continuous rain of mud shots in an attempt to hit Weepinbell, an idea came to him that Ash decided to put into action. Just as soon as Diglett fired off the last attack at Weepinbell, Ash called out, "Weepinbell, use rapid-fire Razor Leaf on the field and don't stop." Weepinbell spun himself up on his vines until he was sitting atop one of the rafters and then started firing non-stop Razor Leafs down at the field below. Diglett disappeared underground again, but that didn't stop Weepinbell as he continued to pelt the field with dozens of leaves which cut deep into the dirt and carved swaths into the loose earth as more and more of the green-colored projectiles impacted the battlefield relentlessly. Andy chuckled. "I don't know what your plan is, Ash, but in case you haven't already noticed, none of your Weepinbell's attacks will be able to touch my Diglett as long as it's under the ground." While that might have been true, with the firestorm of leaves pelting all over the battlefield, it made it impossible for Diglett to shoot up out of the ground and attack Weepinbell without getting hit itself. Andy saw the issue facing he and his Pokémon and decided to rectify the situation by giving a fast command of, "Diglett, come up and quickly use Mud Shot." Bursting out of the ground right after a razor-sharp leaf passed overhead, Diglett came up and shot forth a thick glob of mud and dirt at Weepinbell, an attack in which struck its mark and scored a direct hit as the grass type went falling to the ground below with a cry of pain. As soon as he landed with a heavy thud in the dirt, Andy yelled again, "Diglett, use magnitude." Calling out its name, Diglett summoned its power as the ground beneath the field started to tremble and shake violently. Weepinbell was caught in the midst of the wild shaking and began grunting and groaning just as Diglett disappeared back below ground and went tunneling towards the grass type. Knowing his Pokémon was in trouble, Ash shouted, "Weepinbell, jump into the air and then use a downward tackle on the spot you're standing on now." Managing to free himself from the effects of magnitude, Weepinbell jumped up into the air just as Diglett started to emerge from the ground underneath of it. Pointing downwards, Weepinbell began dropping towards the ground type that was slowly cresting above the surface of the earth. However, right in mid-drop, Weepinbell's tackle suddenly began to change and shift until he was pointing head up in the air instead of head down. Realizing what it was, Ash cheered and called out, "Yeah, Weepinbell, you just learned Slam. Let em have it." Just as Diglett appeared above the ground, Weepinbell fell body first down on top of the tiny mole Pokémon with an incredible amount of force and power. Neither Andy nor the ground type had enough time to counter the grass Pokémon as it smashed down into the ground and sent dirt flying up and outwards in multiple directions due to the sheer force of the hit. When the smoke cleared, however, it showed Weepinbell stuck in a hole in the dirt where Diglett had just been, though with no sign of the ground type. Unfortunately, that didn't last long as seconds later fast tunneling could be seen coming towards Weepinbell's trapped body while he struggled desperately to get out. Ash knew if Diglett managed to attack his Pokémon in such a defenseless state it wouldn't be good, and that was why, just before the ground type could reach Weepinbell, the boy formed a sudden idea and called out, "Weepinbell, point your leaves downwards into the hole and use poison powder." Struggling with all of his might, Weepinbell managed to do as commanded just before Diglett could reach him. Pointing his leaves down, the grass type released a large spore of purple toxic powder which rushed into the hole and coalesced around Diglett just as the little Pokémon burrowed its way into it. The tunneling coming to a stop almost immediately near the surface, Ash took advantage of the situation and shouted, "Weepinbell, jump into the air and then use Slam again. Right on top of where Diglett is under the ground." Jumping skyward, the grass type hurtled down towards the ground below while Andy shouted, "Diglett, move." Unfortunately for the gym leader, his commands were all for naught when, out of time, Weepinbell slammed into the ground below and cratered it with a loud crashing smash. Eventually rolling to the side after recovering from his drop, Weepinbell moved away and revealed a small crater in the dirt where Diglett could be seen laying as unconscious as a drunk passed out on New Year's Eve. Raising his hand, the referee announced swiftly, "Diglett is unable to battle. Weepinbell is the winner." Returning his Pokémon, Andy smiled and pulled out his next Pokéball. "That was pretty impressive, kid. Now let's see how you handle this one. Go Sandslash." In a burst of bright white and silver light, the mouse-like sand-loving Pokémon appeared on the field while slashing its claws into the air and shouting, "Slash slash." Pulling Weepinbell's Pokéball out, Ash was just about to return his Pokémon when he suddenly saw the grass type turn to him and shake his head in the negative, showing that he still wanted to battle. Lowering the Pokéball slightly, Ash looked at Weepinbell intently. "Are you sure you want to keep battling, Weepinbell?" Getting a simple nod in reply with fiery determination in his Pokémon's eyes, the boy smiled. "All right, go do it, Weepinbell." Seeing that both sides were ready to go, the ref lowered both of his hands. "Begin. Sandslash, use slash attack." Andy commanded of his Pokémon without waiting, whom promptly took off like a blur of pure speed at Weepinbell with its right clawed hand raised in the air. Luckily enough, Weepinbell managed to dodge out of the way just in time, but that didn't stop Sandslash, who stayed on the grass type relentlessly as he turned on a sudden whim by sticking his other claw into the ground and then launching at Weepinbell again. The now visibly tired grass type kept dodging and jumping out of the way of the ferocious ground Pokémon's repeated slash attacks, but eventually, luck ran out for him as Sandslash managed to make contact right under Weepinbell's chin and sent the other Pokémon flying. As Weepinbell went soaring through the air, Sandslash jumped back as Andy yelled, "Now use Sandstorm." The ground type whipped its arms outward and into an inward arc and churned up a large twister of sand which sped towards Weepinbell and caught him in midair, spinning and churning the grass Pokémon around inside of the yellow funnel of sand as he cried out in pain and dizziness from the vicious beating he was now suffering. After several long moments of getting thrashed and tossed around inside of the funnel, the sandstorm finally died down, and as it did, Weepinbell fell limply to the ground below. As the sand cloud passed, Ash's Pokémon was revealed to be unconscious after 2 long and hard-fought back-to-back battles. Raising his hand, the ref pointed towards Andy and announced, "Weepinbell is unable to battle, Sandslash wins." Giselle appeared gobsmacked. Ash actually lost a Pokémon. He's never lost a Pokémon in battle before. Misty shook her head. Actually, he lost one against Brock in their gym match together, but I can't believe Weepinbell lost either. It's been such a long time for Ash. Brock crossed his arms. Everyone loses Pokémon in their matches at some point or another. Going your entire career expecting anything less is just foolish, and any trainer with sense knows it. Soledad smiled and looked towards Ash. He doesn't seem to be taking it very hard though, does he? Indeed, in accordance with the redhead's statement, Ash simply smiled and returned Weepinbell to his Pokeball before looking at it and smiling. "You did a great job, Weepinbell, and I'm very proud of you. Take a good rest." Selecting his next Pokemon immediately after, Ash called out, "Paris, it's your turn." In a flash of light, the small bug type appeared from his Pokeball, looking fired up and ready for battle as he dug his pincers into the ground and chanted, "Paris! Paris! Paris!" Andy wasn't about to let his and Sandslash's momentum slack off, however, as he pointed and yelled, "Sandslash, use Metal Claw." The ground type took off at Paris as fast as possible while Ash commanded his Pokemon quickly, use Growth and then dodge Paris. "Paris!" The bug type voiced as his entire body glowed green and he jumped to the side to avoid Sandslash. Immediately after landing, Paris started using Growth again as Andy called out, "Keep using Metal Claw and don't let up Sandslash." The pointy-spined ground type started jumping at Paris again, but the much smaller Pokémon easily avoided it as he kept leaping from side to side, back to front in order to evade his madly attacking opponent. All the while he kept using Growth, becoming stronger and stronger with each second that ticked by. Becoming frustrated with Paris' evasiveness, Andy shouted, "Sandslash, now use Poison Sting." Jumping back, Sandslash growled as the spikes on its back glowed white before exploding up into the air and towards Paris. Seeing the incoming attack, Ash called out, "Paris, jump out of the way and dodge it." The bug type nodded and waited until the spikes of poison energy were within a few feet of him and then jumped out of the way in just the nick of time. However, Sandslash clearly wasn't going to stop until it hit Paris and proved this fact by continuing to fire ceaseless poison stings. Paris kept dodging and moving all around the field in an effort to escape the poison pins, but Andy had a plan in mind to stop Ash's Pokemon's progress cold. Sandslash, use Sandstorm now. Flipping backwards, Sandslash whipped up another howling sand twister which headed straight for Paris and, unfortunately, succeeded in scooping the small Pokémon up into its powerful, vacuum-like funnel. As Paris started to get tossed all around inside of the twister, Andy ordered for his Pokémon to launch more poison stings at him. An attack which Sandslash performed without mercy and commenced to firing dozens of toxic barbs into the cloud of sand. From within the churning twister of earth and dirt, dozens of flashes of white and the pinging sounds of poisonous barbs rebounding off of each other could be heard as it went on and on with seemingly no end in sight. When the sand cloud finally did die down sometime later, Paris dropped to the ground in a manner very similar to Weepinbell, but unlike the grass type before him, Paris was still conscious. No matter how barely so it may have been due to the violent beating he had just endured or the many bruises and purple, poisoned welts on his skin, Paris still refused to give up. Even as the poison coursed through his system, the valiant bug type struggled to get back to his feet on trembling legs while his determined eyes remained locked on Sandslash with an unwavering, steely determination. "Come on, Paris!" Ash yelled encouragingly. "You can do this. I know you can. Don't give up." Rather, it was by the intensity of the battle or the inspiration of his trainer's words, Paris raised his claws to the air and vocalized loudly, "Paraz." As his whole body started to glow a beautiful bluish silver. In just a few very short moments the bug type's form began shifting and changing in shape, becoming bigger and taller in the process as he finally evolved into the final stage of his evolutionary species. When the light finally faded with a small outward burst, the newly evolved Pokémon grunted as a way to announce his new form. Parasect. Wow, Paras evolved. Misty exclaimed in awe. That's awesome, I can't believe it. Giselle chimed with equal excitement. Soledad just smiled while Brock crossed his arms and nodded. It's about time. Ash meanwhile was feeling ecstatic as he raised his fist and cheered. Yeah, Parasect, you finally evolved. That is so awesome, way to go buddy. Pikachu pie pie Pikachu. Pikachu himself chirped aloud in congratulations to his teammate with a raised fist in the air. Andy, on the other hand, wasn't going to let he or his Pokémon get distracted by Paras' surprise evolution and subsequent full healing, and instead quickly made a move to try and catch Ash and Parasect off guard. Use dig. Slash. The ground type replied as it jumped up into the air and then pile drove itself into the dirt-encompassed battlefield. Parasect stayed in one place and didn't move even as Sandslash burrowed its way in multiple directions under the ground while speeding towards the bug type with every intention of putting Parasect down for the final time. However, by that point Ash was more than familiar with the ground burrowing tactics of Andy's ground Pokémon and managed to develop a method in those same short few seconds that he was almost sure would put a cold stop to Sandslash's signature technique in its tracks. Parasect. He yelled. Feel for the vibrations in the earth and focus. Just wait, remain calm and be patient. Parasect attempted to do as his trainer advised and closed his eyes, focusing on nothing but the slight vibrations that he was just barely able to make out underground as Sandslash tunneled around beneath the dirt. Keeping his focus and senses sharp, Parasect was able to feel at just the moment when Sandslash suddenly shot up from underneath of him towards the surface, realizing the intent of the ground type was to catch him off guard and attack him by surprise. At the last second, literally, just as the ground began splintering and cracking in preparation for Sandslash's inevitable appearance, Parasect hopped back just a short few inches. As soon as Sandslash appeared from underneath the ground, Parasect reached out with both of his pincers and locked them around the ground type's throat, effectively stopping its ascent completely. Much to the surprise of Sandslash itself and its trainer. Before it could get free, Ash yelled, "Now use Spore." Slowly calling out his name as he used the move that was synonymous with a Paras evolution, Parasect sent out a plume of thick yellow spore directly into Sandslash's face, which caused the ground type to freak out, at first, and begin thrashing its arms and legs around wildly. Andy gritted his teeth, knowing just how much of a terrible situation his Pokémon was now in, but being completely unable to do anything to avert the fact. When Parasect finally let Sandslash go, the ground type dropped to its feet and wobbled around unsteadily due to the sleep-inducing paralysis now freezing its entire body, but before it could even hope to save itself, Ash shouted a command to his Pokémon. Parasect use continuous scratch. His pincers glowing white, Parasect launched forward and began rapidly cutting into Sandslash over and over again while the dirt-loving Pokémon grunted and groaned loudly in pain but totally incapable of defending itself. Finally, after several seconds of the brutal treatment, Ash yelled again, "Now use Parasect." Raising a single pincer that glowed an even brighter white than when he was using Scratch, Parasect lunged at Sandslash again and raked the glowing appendage down across his opponent's entire front, Sandslash instantly getting launched off of its feet and flung across the dirt-covered battlefield, where it crashed to the ground with a thud and lay still. Seeing the swirls now in its eyes, the referee raised his hand and pointed towards Ash. Sandslash is unable to battle. Parasect wins. Mutely returning his Pokémon, Andy put the Pokéball away and then withdrew another one. "I need you to help me turn this around, Dugtrio, go." Tossing the Pokéball out onto the field, it snapped open and released the evolved form of Diglett, which took to the battleground in a burst of light and chanted its name, "Trio Trio Trio." Seeing as how Parasect still seemed to be in battle-ready shape and wanting to get him some more experience, Ash decided to stick with his bug type as he held his hand out and commanded, "Parasect, use Spore again." Sect. The quadruped bug called out as he sent out another plume of yellow powder from under his shell, which drifted quickly towards the tri-headed ground type like a fast-moving cloud of sparkling dust. However, to everyone's shock and amazement, Dugtrio practically disappeared into the ground like a stone in water long before the spore cloud could come even close to reaching it. At speeds far exceeding that of Diglett, Dugtrio sped towards Parasect under the ground like that of a torpedo rocketing across the sky. Far faster than that of even a speck of light in the dark, starry night sky. Completely taken aback by the speed of Dugtrio, neither Ash nor Parasect had time to counter as the ground type erupted from under the earth and smashed into the bug Pokémon like a battering ram, launching the newly evolved Parasect across the field where it landed with a heavy thud and grunted in pain. Before the bug type could stand back up and attempt to counterstrike, Dugtrio was already below the earth again and tunneling towards Parasect. Nothing but all possible haste and vicious intent behind its movements. Looking around rapidly as the ground type zigzagged this way and that like lightning, Parasect couldn't even begin to hope to follow the extremely quick movements of his opponent. Even as Ash was yelling at him to focus, Parasect was simply incapable of following Dugtrio. Finally, when it came bursting to the surface with Andy yelling, "Use sand tomb." All Parasect saw was a funnel of roaring yellow sand and brown dirt hurtling up towards it before the evolved form of Paras was shot skywards in a far thicker and much denser form of sandstorm. Ash watched as his Pokémon was thrashed around inside of the thick upward spout of impenetrable sand for what seemed like forever but was really only a minute at the most before, with a sudden abrupt halt, the sand funnel dissipated entirely. Like an identical image of what had happened to Weepinbell earlier, Parasect fell limply to the ground and lay still with his eyes closed and body unmoving, providing in spoken truth that the bug type was now permanently out of the battle. Smiling, Ash returned Parasect and nodded to the ball now in his hand. "You did amazing, Parasect, thank you. Take a nice rest." Stowing it away, Ash pulled out his last choice for the battle and looked emotionlessly towards the ground of the battlefield where he knew Dugtrio was currently hiding below. Also knowing that his Pokémon of choice for the last round was going to end up giving both Andy and Dugtrio more of a shock than they would ever expect, the black-haired trainer tossed the ball in his hand up into the air. "Firo, redeem your teammates." As the ball snapped open and revealed the large flying-type Pokémon within that looked impressively healthy, muscular and quite strong from the constant training he did back at the lab with Pidgeot, Firo raised his long neck to the air and cawed, "Roowwww." As Andy gritted his teeth at the appearance of the natural type superior to his own Pokémon, Soledad nodded approvingly and crossed her arms. "Now that's a smart type match-up." Brock shook his head grimly and replied in a slightly ominous tone, "It's more than that, Soledad. I didn't think he would actually use Firo against a ground type in this battle, but I apparently underestimated just how much he hates when one of his Pokémon gets hurt or knocked out. Dugtrio may be quick from what we've seen so far, but this isn't gonna pretty." Misty shook her head, an action mimicked by Giselle, as the redhead promptly agreed with the squinty-eyed teen with no hesitation to her voice whatsoever. "I hope Ash at least doesn't let Firo get too out of hand or else Dugtrio might get hurt." Soledad looked between them all in confusion. "What are you guys taking about? Just because Firo has the type advantage doesn't mean that Dugtrio is automatically going to lose." Brock kept his gaze locked on Firo above, whom was simply hovering up in the air while staring down at the dirt-shrouded battlefield like he could actually see through the ground to where Dugtrio was residing below. "You don't understand, Soledad," Brock began. "That Firo trains heavily with Ash's Pidgeot all the time using extremely heavy aerial-designed weights. He's fast, powerful and a whole lot stronger than most flying types are. The swim training Ash puts them both through only increases that strength tenfold." Soledad's eyes widened. "It can swim." Giselle nodded with a smile. "Both of Ash's flying types can." At that same moment Andy acted quickly in hopes of catching Ash and Firo off guard by yelling, "Dugtrio use mud shot." Popping up out of the ground, the tri-headed ground type shot several balls of condensed mud up at Firo, but to both it and Andy's surprise, the large-winged Pokémon suddenly vanished from where he had been hovering and reappeared several feet away as the mud ball passed him by harmlessly. Not stopping, Dugtrio continued blasting several mud bombs up at Firo, but, almost as though they were nothing more than a lazy annoyance, the fast-flying bird merely dodged and moved out of the way effortlessly of each filthy projectile. Obviously, after battling against Ash for so long, Andy had learned not to lighten up on his attacks, and it was this very mindset that caused him to keep yelling for Dugtrio to use a wide array of mud-based attacks like Mud Shot and Mud Bomb in a far-flung hope to knock Firo out of the air. The flying type showed just how futile those efforts were, though, as Firo gracefully weaved in and out of every single attack and would sometimes even go as far as to simply just raise or lower himself in the air to get out of the way. After several minutes of this went by, and upon seeing the frustration on Andy's face, Ash decided to stop toying with the gym leader as a form of recompense for his fallen Pokémon and raised his hand while calling out, "Firo, use Whirlwind." His eyes gleaming viciously with the aggressiveness that was so commonplace in his species, Firo capitalized on his trainer's call for action and then began whipping his powerful wings downward in a motion that quickly churned up a powerful gust of wind which blew towards the battlefield below like a typhoon. Dugtrio immediately took to tunneling under the ground again, but to the ground type's great misfortune the tactic simply wouldn't work an umpteenth time around. The windstorm that Firo, seemingly effortlessly, churned up blew down over the loose dirt battlefield and sent massive amounts of the soft sediment flying in all directions of the gym. In basic terms, the vicious wind was quite literally cutting a swath into the ground and carving out a large portion of the field that Dugtrio was hiding beneath. No one really knew exactly what Ash and Firo's mindset was until, gradually, the very top of Dugtrio's three heads started to become visible. A fact Andy saw and caused for him to grow wide-eyed as he shouted out to his strongest Pokémon, "Dugtrio, dig down deeper. Hurry." Dugtrio attempted to do its trainer's bidding, but unfortunately for it, the entire gym was sitting on a large concrete pad that had been poured for the foundation. Due to this, Dugtrio could dig no deeper before it hit the impassable mass of solid cement and had its progress instantly halted. At that point Firo knew he had his quarry, but instead of risking flying down for a close-range attack and Dugtrio using one of its earthen-based attacks as a surprise counter, the flying type was smart and instead waited for Ash's command. A command in which the black-haired boy gave a scant few seconds later as he raised his hand and shouted, "Firo, use Gust." Flapping his powerful wings once more, Firo conjured up a powerful and sizable twister of wind which spun down onto the battlefield and covered the entire area in its unstoppable cyclonic wrath. With tons of dirt getting picked up and drawn into the funnel of air, essentially turning it a muddy brown color, Dugtrio itself was even eventually pulled up into the twister, effectively giving everyone below a first-hand view of just what the ground-loving Pokémon looked like outside of its earthly dwelling. Oddly enough, Dugtrio's body was really just three Diglett fused together like a magneton, with the rectangular bodies all merging at one focal point at the very end of its small form. A fused point of origin in which resembled what a tree knot would look like grown onto the side of a tree. For several long, tense moments, Dugtrio was spun and thrown around inside of the funnel of violently churning wind until, just when everyone thought an end would never come, the small Pokémon was suddenly spat out of the twister and hurtled to the ground below, where it slammed into the badly damaged battlefield and kicked up a thick haze of smoke and dirt. As the mini tornado finally died down and all became still once more inside the gym, the smoke cleared and revealed Dugtrio out for the count in a tiny crater that was carved into the concrete foundation underneath the main floor. Raising his hand, the referee pointed towards Ash and announced, "Dugtrio is unable to battle. The battle in this match hereby goes to Ash Ketchum and his Firo." Andy smiled a little disappointedly and returned his Pokémon with a few words of earnest consolation to it, while Ash cheered Firo's praise and congratulated his Pokémon as the flying type returned to the ground below. Walking up to the boy while he happily hugged and rubbed his Firo's neck, Andy put a hand to the back of his head and sighed. "Well, you beat me. Great job, young man, that was truly a great battle." Ash smiled and stood up. Thanks, your Pokémon put up a really good fight too, Andy. Weepinbell and Parasect needed some battle experience and I'm glad you helped me get them some. Andy looked up at Firo and chuckled. I got nervous as soon as you pulled out this guy because even though I train my Pokémon to try and become strong against flying types, anytime we battle against a visibly well-trained and powerful one it never bodes well in our favor. I could tell this one was tough right away and you sure did prove it. Brock spoke up then from behind Ash as a way to reply to Andy's summarization. Well, to be fair to you and your Pokémon, Andy, ground and flying type Pokémon just have a very distinct advantage and disadvantage against one another like water and fire types do. Put a well-trained Pokémon like Ash's Firo into the mix and it's gonna be a tough battle. Andy nodded. True enough. He then looked down at Ash again and smiled as he reached into his back pants pocket and withdrew a small black case which he held out to his challenger. Ash, for defeating the Triangle Village Pokémon Gym I would like to present you with this. He then opened the case and revealed the content inside to be his gym's own official Pokémon League gym badge. The badge itself had two different colors to it and was shaped almost like a really angular pair of wings that had a needle straight point at the end and a wider dip up at the top. One side of the wings was a light, faded green and the other wing was like a tan, equally faded maroon red. All in all, it was a rather plain-looking badge if not somewhat sharp and shiny in appearance, most likely due to the unique colors. As Ash took the badge and examined it carefully, making sure Firo and Pikachu also got a good look, Andy crossed his arms and smiled. So I reckon you kids are probably gonna be heading to the next nearest town for another gym battle then, right? Misty returned his smile with one of her own. That's right, sir. Ash is determined to collect all the Kanto gym badges, so we're traveling everywhere we can to give him the chance. Is that so? The man questioned as he rubbed his chin. Well, if that's the case then you'd probably be better off to head out to Boulder Town since that's the closest town to this one with a gym. Boulder Town? Giselle questioned. Andy nodded. Yes, ma'am. If you head west from here then you'll eventually hit it in about, I'd say maybe 3 days or so on foot. It's a nice little place and the gym there is set up in a pretty neat fashion. I won't ruin it for you but suffice to say, you'll be amazed. Once he was done looking the badge over, Ash smiled at Andy. Thanks for a great battle and the info, Andy, I appreciate it. I hope your gym does really well from here on out. The older man shook hands with the younger black-haired boy. Thank you, Ash, I wish you luck in your future challenges as well. Take care. After saying their goodbyes to Andy, Ash and his friends made a stop by the local Pokémon Center for the night before they would then have to leave the next day in preparation for the 3-day journey to their next destination. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. This is strange, Misty surmised bluntly from beside her friends as she stared at the somewhat small town laid out before them. I don't think I've ever seen a town that looked like this before. What had captured the redhead's fascination so was the sight of the very aptly named Boulder Town that she and the others had only just now arrived at, with the time being right at around high noon. 3 days' travel having indeed been enough to reach it as Andy had evenly surmised. The town, while small and normal in appearance when it came to the makeup of the buildings and houses themselves, was very unique when it came to another aspect. That being the way in which practically every single residence was built right into the sides of the massive, almost monolithic boulders that littered the landscape in front of the even larger cliffside that towered high above the town. Ash kicked at the barren, sandy ground beneath his feet while looking around. No kidding, this is pretty neat. I wonder where the gym is. Soledad questioned aloud as she too glanced around the area. Seeing someone coming out of their house and walking down the small walkway that had been carved into the rock spire it rested upon, Brock nodded towards the person. Maybe we can ask that guy, he might have an idea. The group of traveling trainers approached the man whom was currently checking his mail and upon seeing them, he turned around and smiled kindly. Well, hello there, strangers. Ain't seen you around here before, new to town. Ash answered for them as they came to a stop. Yeah, we actually just got here, sir, and we're looking for the Pokémon gym. Can you please tell us where it is? Turning, the man pointed to the cliffside that stretched high above the town. Sure thing, if you just head straight towards that cliff you'll find it. The gym's located inside of a cave, so watch your step and be careful. It's visitor friendly, but occasionally moisture will collect inside and make the walkway slippery. Ash and his friends shared a glance at the mention of the gym being located in a cave, but then looked back at the man and thanked him before continuing their way through the town towards the towering cliffside in the near distance. Eventually, they found themselves standing before a large cave mouth with a sign near the entrance pointing inside that read, Boulder Town Pokémon Gym, this way, and had an arrow pointing towards it. Looking at one another, the five of them took to the tunnel beneath the cliffside and found themselves walking down a rather narrow walkway that had stalactites on either side of them and a fair amount of moisture collected on the ground just beneath their feet. The passage through the cave was, luckily enough, well lit with lanterns, and when they finally came to the end of the tunnel they entered into a large cavern with very high ceilings and a somewhat cold chill to the air. What was more, all of the rock was faintly blue for some reason, which only made the general appearance of the cavern seem unusually unique. Of course, the size and appearance of the cavern absolutely paled in comparison to the most standout feature that donned the walls and even ceiling above. To Ash and his friends' amazement, the entire cave was adorned with multicolored gems of varying sizes and shapes, which were arranged all along practically every square inch of cavern space that there was. Oh my Arceus! Giselle breathed in awe. It's so beautiful. Some of those gems have to be the size of my head. Misty exclaimed in astonishment. Just one of those would be enough to set you up for life, Soledad observed with an equal sense of awe as she gazed all around the cave. No kidding. Who would have ever believed something this precious and incredible was laying just below the barren landscape outside, Brock stated. There's gotta be hundreds of gems in here. Thousands would be the more accurate statement, young man. A gruff, slightly aged voice spoke up from what looked like a mineshaft to the left of them. As they all turned to see who spoke, a broad-shouldered, tall, middle-aged man with a bushy gray beard that came down to his upper chest came slowly walking out from the darkness of the shaft with a pickaxe held over his left shoulder. The man was dressed in an all-gray mining outfit with black boots and gloves on his hands and feet and a yellow hard hat on his head. He appeared to be somewhat dirty with all kinds of smudge stains on his clothes, but behind the beard a smile could be seen as he approached the five young travelers and then twirled his pickaxe in the air. Most people guess on the low side, but all throughout this cavern there are thousands of gems spread all around it. Lowering his axe to the floor, the man leaned on it and nodded his head. The name's Jeb, sole miner of this here mineshaft and the leader of the Boulder Town Pokémon Gym. Nice to meet you young fellas and ladies. Ash smiled and introduced himself. I'm Ash, and this is Pikachu and my friends. He then gestured to the Pokémon on his shoulder, followed by the other Pokémon trainers and coordinator at his sides. Brock, Misty, Soledad and Giselle. They all greeted the man politely, to which Jeb just gave a simple tip of his hard hat to in return before Brock asked curiously, so how can you mine this whole place by yourself? Seems dangerous and like a mostly impossible feat to me, no offense. The man waved him off. None taken. This here cave has been in my family for generations. I come from a long line of miners that goes all the way back to my great-granddaddy who owned this land originally and blasted his way into this cave while doing some excavation. We never sold the deed to any big mining cooperations, so it stayed privately owned. He then gestured at all of the gems around them. These gems are mined and then sold all throughout the region for different purposes and has been for decades. My granddaddy was the first one of us to get into Pokémon and decided he wanted to become a gym leader as well as a miner. He set up the gym in here by blasting this room out and making it bigger, and my daddy, followed by me after him, decided to take up the torch and follow in his footsteps. Leaning on his digging tool again, Jeb's eyes wandered over the five of them. So, which one of you are here to challenge my gym? Or did you come just to see the cavern? Ash stepped forward. I do, sir. I would like to challenge your gym. Jeb smiled and spun his pickaxe again. Well, alright. Just so you know, this is a gym that specializes in rock-type Pokémon, so I hope you came prepared. Ash smiled and nodded. We're more than ready. A short time later found Ash and Jeb facing off in the large gem-encrusted cavern with the referee that Jeb had called in from town standing near the back of the cave as the judge and jury for the impending battle. "Hey Brock, how many rock-type gyms are there here in Kanto besides yours and Jeb's?" Soledad asked curiously. The teen shrugged. "Just us two as far I know. New gyms pop up every now and again and aren't mentioned until the following year's Kanto region guidebook, so to my knowledge, there's only two right now." After the referee finished giving the standard layout of the rules for the upcoming match, Jeb selected his Pokémon and the result was a solid-looking Graveler that took to the field ready for combat. Sizing his opponent up and then sharing a glance with Pikachu, Ash chose his own Pokémon and called out, "Weepinbell go." As the somewhat small grass type materialized out of his ball, the ref brought his hands down and announced for the battle to begin. Raising his hand, Ash called out, "Use Razor Leaf Weepinbell." "Weepinbell." The grass Pokémon yelled as he unleashed a flurry of leaves at his rock-solid opponent. Smirking, Jeb shouted, "That old trick won't work on us, boy." Graveler use Rollout. Tucking itself in tightly, Graveler took off in a fast roll at Weepinbell while simply smashing right through all of the leaves. However, just before the rock type could collide with him, Weepinbell jumped out of the way and sent two of his vines at his opponent. Coming out of his roll, Graveler surprised Weepinbell and Ash by grabbing both vines around its forearms and then tugging them down tightly. Spinning itself in a circle, the rock type picked Weepinbell up off the ground and sent the grass type flying around in dizzying circular patterns. "Weepinbell, try and get free!" Ash yelled, though it was a little too late. Using the control it now temporarily boasted over Weepinbell, Graveler started smashing the grass Pokémon up against rocks, the floor and even the gem-encrusted walls while its opponent was defenseless. The grunts and groans of pain from Weepinbell could very audibly be heard within the cavern due to Graveler's harsh treatment. Ash knew something had to be done and, thinking fast, he commanded Weepinbell to start releasing a cloud of stun spore. Even though he was dizzy and in pain, the grass type did as commanded and started shooting a cloud of paralyzing spores into the air which plumed outward and upwards. Seeing this, Graveler quickly let Weepinbell go by smashing him against the floor once more and then letting go of his vines. When Jeb yelled out, Graveler used Dig and escape that spore. The rock type was quick to tunnel under the ground and escape the potentially match-ending passive-natured attack. Weepinbell had slowly managed to pull himself back up with bruises and cuts now marring his body and, not seeing Graveler anywhere nearby, immediately caused him to go on high alert as he started looking all around at the ground below him. The memories of how Sandslash had defeated him from before still fresh in his mind. "Weepinbell!" Ash yelled. "Just focus and use your concentration. Keep your eyes trained to the ground and feel the earth, don't just look at it." Doing as his trainer advised, Weepinbell closed his eyes and focused on any and all vibrations and sounds that he might be able to pick on from underneath the earth. Jeb obviously thought he didn't stand a chance though, because at that moment he yelled, "Graveler, come up now." Almost in slow motion, Weepinbell felt the ground tremble and shake below him just before it splintered to reveal Graveler emerging from underneath. Acing on his proverbial feet, however, the grass type quickly jumped away just before the rock type could get him and capitalized on the moment by shooting forth his vines, which wrapped themselves around Graveler's body and cinched down tight even while he was still raising into the air. With a loud grunt of effort, Weepinbell strained and used all of his strength to spin the surprised Graveler up and around before smashing it into the ground hard. Retracting his vines immediately thereafter, the grass type steadied himself just as Ash called out, "Great Weepinbell!"